Hi guys! Oh my. So I'm sort of playing Frankenstein this week. We've got a Cleo head, a Nephra body, and I think one of these arms might belong to a Claudine. A huge thank you to my friend Zaffy from Discord for letting me snag these pieces from you. I wanted Cleo for her tanned skin and angular face, and then Zaffy just happened to have a Nephra torso as well, and I think they'll go together really nicely. Nephra is the older sister body type, so she has a larger bust, slightly more muscular arms, and a lot more detail in the musculature of her neck, which I'm really excited about. I like the Monster High normal bodies too, but these big sister bodies just have a much more beefy and curvy look to them. What about her legs, I hear you asking? We don't need them, because this girl is going to be a mermaid. I've always loved mermaids since I was a little girl, so when I finally decided to make one, I had a lot of ideas floating around. I knew a few things for certain. I wanted her to have a crown and lots of hair, and I was going to be very particular about how I did the tail. More on that later. So I ended up being a little overwhelmed with ideas. Thankfully, I'm part of the Stockbox Discord chat, and I was able to toss around some ideas with some of my friends on there. I'm a terrible artist, so I borrowed Ariel's design from a coloring book and used it as a base to explore some color palettes. I was immediately drawn to the bright pastel colors, but my friends pointed out that there are a lot of those sorts of designs already out there, and a black and gold mermaid would really stand out in a crowd. I love the high contrast of white on black and the little touches of gold. I'm actually in the mood to start with clothes, or rather, her covering. I've collected a bunch of pearls in different sizes and shapes to make a top instead. I tie a thread to a bit of necklace chain and then start looping strands of pearls to make a loopy top that will mostly cover her chest. Next is a crown. I saw a bunch of these extravagant mermaid crowns on Pinterest, and that's mostly where I got the idea to do this doll from. I cut out a tiara shape from a piece of cardboard and glue it down to a bit of black fabric. This will give my shells and beads a good base to hold them up with and hopefully keep the shape that I want pretty clear. I got a bag of the teeniest, tiniest shells that I could find and used my airbrush to paint some of them black. I also have some quartz points here, one of which I smashed up with a hammer, but unfortunately they were mostly too chunky to use. I collect all the bits I think I could use in a crown and start fiddling with them. With the head nearby for reference, I experiment with placement and materials, trying to gauge how it will look once it's on the head. This is a little difficult since when the crown is on the head, it's on a curve, and when it's on the table, it's flat. Not to mention, things keep falling off and slipping around. To combat that, I put a loop of tape down on the crown and stuck the shells and beads to that while I decided the placement. Once things look the way you want them to, use hot glue to attach the bits to the crown. I was going for an overstuffed, sort of homemade crown rather than anything too regal or purposeful looking. This was a lot of fun and pretty quick to make. I think I only took an hour or so on the crown, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Make sure you leave some room at the ends where you can attach the crown to the head. I'll be using a white-headed pin to hopefully blend in with the other pearls and hair. On to the face. I've already whacked off the hair, so next is wiping off the factory paint with pure acetone. I literally always think about Toy Story when I'm doing this, and I feel so guilty. Hopefully she likes her new face. Scrape down the inside of her head to dislodge the glue chunks, and then yank those out with a pair of pliers. Off screen, I rooted her with hair and swept it all into a big hair burrito. For the blushing, I wanted to go in a little softer than I usually do, so I'm using some fairly desaturated colors. I've got a few shades of contour, a couple highlighters, and some reds for the blush and lips. If you're having issues with blushing your dolls, I really recommend watching makeup tutorials on YouTube. It's the same principle, trying to highlight certain parts of the face and making others appear deeper set. I always contour the same places: edge of the nose, right below the cheekbones, the jawline, the edge of the forehead. Then highlight under the eyes, along the bridge of the nose, the tip of the nose, and the very top of the cheekbone. With the body, I went ham on the blushing. I contour the sides and under the bust. I color in her belly button with a pencil, trying to keep it sort of a teardrop shape rather than a perfect circle. I also defined the faint set of abs she has, lightly going over the crease with my pencil and then rubbing the pigment in with a Q-tip. Then on her back, I contour the line of her spine and the shoulder blades. I'm really happy I got a Nephra body for this, since the big sister body type isn't as slim and waifish as the other girls are. For a mermaid who swims all day, it feels like it makes sense for her to look a little stronger. Switching back to the face, I do have one small issue with Cleo's head. I really wanted a soft, round look to the lips, one where there's not a defined cupid's bow. So to get this look, I tried bringing my pastels up higher, overdrawing in some places, but that just made her look like her mouth was sort of irritated. So I tried going in with my pencil to force the line of the lip up, to mixed effect. I think if this was a Draculaura head, I could have gotten away with this. She's got a very round pout already, whereas Cleo has slightly thinner, much more defined lips. I think the only way around this would be to get a little epoxy in there, but honestly, I just didn't want to have to paint the head and blend all that in. I've already added some eyeshadow in the blushing process, so that makes it easier to come back in with a medium brown to sketch out the eye shape. I know most other artists start with a very light color, but I always have a hard time seeing those lines, so I just go in with the medium pencil and kind of hope that I don't mess up the shape too badly. For the whites of the eyes, I'm using the General's chalk pencil that Blank Space Dolls gifted me during our April collab. It really makes light colored eyes so much easier. I cannot recommend this pencil enough, you guys. For this doll, I really wanted to go ham on the highlighter. So here I'm adding a light gold micro glitter to her upper cheekbones and laying it on pretty thick. I know that once I hit it with the MSC, it will darken and lose most of its shine, so don't be afraid to pile it on. In fact, I came back and put on more highlighter in almost every layer of MSC, which was about 6 or 7 for this project, and I still think I could have gone a little heavier handed with the highlighter. Of course, I'm a little biased. I am a glow monster. Next, I dust in the eyebrows lightly. Looking at this again, I sort of picked brown eyebrows without thinking about it very much. I was afraid of putting white eyebrows on her and having them be too light, but now I really wish I had gone with a gradient from white to gray. I think it would have set the face off nicely. Oh well, maybe next time. I like her brown brows too. I think dark brows against light hair looks very captivating. It somehow gives your character a more serious look. For the eyes this time, I wanted to do a greenish hazel. I start with a gold color on the iris, then come in with a slate blue on the outer rim to act as the darkest color. From there, I shade the top of the iris with a medium green, then fade it out to a lighter green at the bottom where the most light will catch. Here I'm adding a few little flecks of yellow to the iris. Dot on the pupils by picking up pigment directly from the pencils on your brush, and darken the lash line the same way. Once I'm happy with the lashes and pupil, I beef up some of the colors in the iris with the wet pigments too. For some added sparkle, I got some nail art pearls and dipped them in glue to stick to her face. I think it adds a really cool touch and makes her look very mystical. Also, I'm a huge sucker for pearls. Once those are in place, I gloss the eyes and lips and her face is finished. For the tail, it was very important to me that it move well and be very poseable. The only way I'm aware of doing this is by making it a ball joint style tail. I'll be making a series of little pinch pots with holes in the bottom for an elastic to go through. I'm using an air dry clay to keep everything very light and strong. This is a super strong kind I found on Amazon. It says it's stone clay. I don't know much about air dry clay, but my cat knocked a piece of this onto the floor from my kitchen table and it didn't even put a chip in the clay, so I'm gonna assume it's pretty strong. I followed Delightful's tutorial on her dragon tail for this, and it translates pretty well over to a mermaid tail. Off camera, I traced out the shape of the tail that I wanted, with a pair of legs for scale, then bisected the tail into pieces that I'm going to make out of clay. I did wrap her body in cling film to protect the plastic, but that ended up just getting in the way, so I'd say don't bother. With wet hands, I pinch off a piece and start softening it up. Mush some clay into her hip area, trying to round out the shape once again. I prefer my mermaids curvy, so I gave her some fairly round hips. Here I'm using a pencil to poke a hole so I can get to the hole in her groin later on when I put the elastic in. Looking at it now, maybe I could have just strung some elastic through and saved myself some headache, but I didn't think of that till long after the fact. I actually made 4 holes, 2 on either side of the hips and 1 up through the groin. I made the side holes because I was concerned about the elastic getting stuck in the bend of the groin hole, so with the side holes I was able to poke the elastic back around into place. Moving on to the first pinch pot, I make a ball and then pierce it with a chopstick, then work the opening out until it's much wider at the top than it is at the bottom. Do frequent mock-ups with the pots to make sure they move freely inside each other. I made mine a little too tall and maybe a little too thick at the tops, but they worked out pretty fine, so don't be too hung up on the shape. 8 pots later, you have a full tail. Set them aside to dry for a few days, then refine the shape by sanding. These are all pretty messy looking, but that's fine, you actually won't see these at all. They did come out a little too big. I should have made them smaller for a slimmer looking tail. Once the pots are dry, get a thick piece of wire and bend it into a hook. Make sure it's not too long. I ended up cutting this one down quite a bit so it wouldn't hit the bottom of the pot above it. For the bottom piece, I wanted something that would be very strong. Since I'd seen Delightful's bottom bead crumble, I went ahead and just made mine out of epoxy. This part is super easy. It's just a fat ball of epoxy wrapped around the bottom of the hook, which of course I attach off camera, but it's not difficult. You just mush it on there and shape it into a ball. Again, it's not a problem if it's messy. Double check that the ball is big enough to stay outside of the last pot, and that the last pot is still able to wiggle around on top of it. For the elastic, this is where those 2 extra hip holes come in handy. Finagle a piece of elastic through the groin hole and pull it out through the other end. I pulled this through with the power of editing, because watching me struggle with it, even sped up, might give you a brain aneurysm. I sort of eyeball how long the elastic should be and then cut off the extra, just for ease. Thread all your pots through with the elastic and then make her do the worm! No, but really, I'm testing the movement here. If your elastic is too tight, she won't be able to move as easily or freely. pull the elastic taut and mark the end with a pencil. Where the mark is should be the longest point of your loop when you fold it in half. You can tie it in place, but I found that it was a little difficult to control the placement of, so I just sewed mine down. This feels like a stronger solution too. I used 2 lengths since my elastic was a little too small and therefore too weak to stand up to the tail. With 2 lengths, the connection feels stronger. With a bit of string to help, I slide the pots back into place on the elastic, and finally catch all 4 loops with the hook and ball we made earlier. Just cut off the guiding string and the skeleton is done. Did I say skeleton? Yes. Yes, I did. Does anyone else remember a few years ago when the realistic looking silicone mermaid tails were first coming out? They were so beautiful and dramatic and I fell in love with them, but with an average price of around $4,000, I knew I could never buy one for myself. Even making one yourself seems to cost around $2,000 in materials, so I gave up on the idea until now, when I can make it in miniature. So after a lot of research, I got a trial size of silicone from Smooth On and a scale impression mat and got to work. To make the tail, you'll need a soft, pourable silicone, a scale impression mat, and powder pigments in any colors you want. You'll also need an impression for the fins. I looked all over the internet for a fin impression that would be large enough and never found one, so you know what that means, we'll have to make it ourselves. I grabbed some random Fimo clay I had lying around and mixed up this streaky disc. That's fine, it doesn't matter what it looks like. I traced a fin shape from a picture online, printed it out and cut it out, then laid it on top of the clay disc. Anything that's sunk into the clay will be a raised part on the silicone, so the tines of the fin need to be pressed down. I trace over the lines with the end of a chopstick. Then, for some light details, I used a thin mechanical pencil to scrape little lines in the panels between the tines. I also added a little pocket fin that will go on her hips in the negative space in the bottom. Now let's just pull this up and pop it in the oven. I said pull it up. I said pull it up. Ugh. Yeah, I ended up having to make this again because I pushed it into the plastic tablecloth too much. If you do this, make sure it's over a bit of plastic so it's easy to yank off. Back to the tail. I start out with a paper towel wrapped around her tail and draw on top of that with a pencil the pattern that I want. Once I'm happy with the placement of things, I come back in with an easier to see pen. This will serve as my template. I made the pieces a little bigger than necessary to give myself some wiggle room to work with, and ended up with a front and back panel. I traced this out on more paper towel so that I could cut out the little swoop shapes to use it as a template for the gold. Speaking of gold, mine is a little too brassy for my taste. I mixed it with some pink to make a slightly more rose gold color. Mixing a ton of glitter is really satisfying and also extremely messy, so make sure your container is way bigger than you need it to be. With a paintbrush, I lay down a thick layer of glitter in the cutouts of the template. Once that's done, mix part A and B of your silicone together, according to the package instructions. I found this silicone to be very forgiving and didn't have to measure too closely. I just marked the inside of my cup at a 1/2 inch and 1 inch and combined from there. With my silicone mixed up, I added some black pigment powder and poured the lot over top of the gold. It's worth noting here that a small amount of silicone will go a long way with this stuff. I wasted a lot of material just mixing too much, and the pot life isn't very long, so you can't save it. I also should have been wearing gloves. It's not toxic or anything, it's just impossible to get off your hands. After about 40 minutes, the sheets of silicone are completely dry and ready to be pulled off the mat. I had a very geometric pattern in mind for this mermaid, and I think that is where things started to go wrong for me. It just doesn't leave much room for error, so if you're going to try this with this kind of tail, I'd really recommend using ombres and gradients rather than something like this. You see, this is the issue. The colors aren't as sharp as I would like, and the glitter sort of spread to areas where it wasn't supposed to be. It doesn't look terrible, I'm just not that happy with it either. At this point, it was very late, and I thought I was just being fussy, and that once it was all together, I would like it a lot better, so I just kind of kept going. I had also dusted the gold powder across the fin mold, and didn't like how that came out either. Cut out the tail according to your template, working around the edges of the scales like a puzzle. This will give it a smoother look when you attach the two pieces together. Mix up some more colorless silicone. We're going to be using this like glue to put all the pieces together. This is the point when things really started to fall apart for me. Gluing the two pieces together really requires 4 hands and gloves. I made a huge mess and got silicone all over the tail, and more of the pigment was rubbing off the outside. It just wasn't working. I ended up sort of wrapping her in a paper towel in an attempt to hold everything together nice and tight. Then some of the paper towel got stuck in the tail. It was just a huge mess. This was my second attempt at a tail, and a first attempt at putting it all together, and it was about 2 in the morning, so I took a step back and forced myself to go to bed and pick it back up in the morning. I didn't film the third attempt because I wasn't sure if I'd need to make a tail a 4th time, but I think you'll agree it came out much better. This video is getting very long, so I reattached the head and styled the hair and put her crown on all off camera. I hope you don't mind. And here she is all finished. Her name is Nereidia. Despite how difficult her tail was to make, I think she ended up looking really beautiful and unique. As I said earlier, I really love mermaids, and ever since I started this hobby 8 months ago, I've been dying to make a mermaid. I'm glad I forced myself to wait until my face-up and general crafting skills were a little better, but now I may have broken through the mermaid floodgates. I'd love to do more mermaids, maybe as a series. We could do all sorts of beautiful mermaids, like a koi fish theme, and I've seen a few concepts where the fin is based off of an Indian sari. That was gorgeous. I've also been playing around with the idea of a skeleton, scary mermaid for Halloween. What do you guys think? I'm going to do at least one more mermaid so I can properly show the method to make the tail. Let me know in the comments what kind of mermaids you would like to see, and if you think a mermaid series would be fun. Wow, this was a long video. I hope you don't mind me taking a moment to make sure you subscribe, and don't forget to tap that bell icon so you won't miss a video. I put out a new video every other Thursday. Follow me on Instagram for more behind the scenes stuff and sneak peeks. Thank you so much for watching, and bye for now!